The night air over northern France tasted like wet steel, cold, metallic, and heavy with the truth that every breath could be someone's last. It was June 1944, just days after the beaches had swallowed thousands of boys in uniforms still smelling of home. The makeshift field hospital stood inside the shattered skeleton of what once had been a village church, its stained glass windows now replaced with flapping olive canvas that let the moon pour through in fractured silver beams. Jane Harris wiped her hands on her blood-soaked uniform for the fourth time in the last hour, but the stains didn't matter anymore. Nothing stayed clean out here. Not hands, not clothes, not conscience. She was 22, a combat nurse from Ohio, a girl who used to braid her hair before school and walk with her little sister to the town library on Saturdays. Back then, she believed the world was built on kindness and steady rules. Now she stitched young men back together, knowing half wouldn't survive long enough to open their eyes again. Gunfire echoed faintly in the distance, a dull cracking like someone smashing tree branches underfoot. And every man on the stretchers flinched, even those unconscious. The walls shook with each artillery thump. Dust rained from the shattered rafters like gray snow. "Jane, over here! He's crashing!" Lieutenant Morgan shouted across the dim room, his voice stretching thin. Jane ran. She didn't walk, didn't hesitate, didn't blink. She moved the way soldiers moved when instinct overrode exhaustion. Automatic, precise, driven by something deeper than strength. The man on the cot was barely older than 17. His blonde hair plastered to his forehead, his lips trembling in a whisper that no one could hear. A shrapnel wound had opened his abdomen like a torn book. Jane grabbed gauze, pressed hard, and felt the warm gush of blood push through her fingers. She leaned in, her voice trembling but steady enough to reach him. "Stay with me, sweetheart. I've got you. Don't you drift." For a moment he opened his eyes, boyish, terrified eyes. He tried to speak, but only blood bubbled between his lips. She didn't look away. Not now, not ever. She held his gaze as if her eyes alone could anchor him to life. But then, he exhaled. Long, final. A sound that nurses recognized the way sailors recognize the sea. Jane felt his body become still beneath her hands. Too still. She swallowed, hard. Her breath shook, but she forced herself to remain upright. A soldier on the next cot was screaming for morphine. Another was choking on his own blood. There was no time to feel anything. Not grief, not fear, not anger. She moved to the next man. The corpsman beside her murmured, "Harris, you need rest." Rest. The word almost sounded mythical. She hadn't slept in 38 hours. Her knuckles were raw, her nails cracked. A thin cut on her cheek stung each time sweat rolled through it. "I'm fine," she whispered. "We keep going." She didn't know she wouldn't see her unit alive again. Not one of them. Outside, the rumbling grew louder. The medics paused, their eyes lifting to the ceiling, where dust showered down in small, trembling waves. A scout burst through the entrance, panting, his helmet askew. "They broke the line," he gasped. "They're coming straight toward us. Armor, German armor, 2 kilometers out." Everyone froze. Even the dying seemed to sense the shift. Jane felt her heart drop, not in fear for herself, but fear for her boys. The ones who trusted her with their last breaths. The ones who whispered for their mothers and sweethearts. The ones who'd never seen 20. Lieutenant Morgan shouted, "Start relocating the wounded. Move anyone who can be moved." But before any of them could react, a deafening whistle tore through the sky. Artillery. Incoming. Jane had only 2 seconds to duck. The explosion swallowed the world. The walls of the old church blew inward, wood splintering like brittle bones. The roof collapsed first in a fiery ripple, then caved fully with a roar that drowned out every scream. Canvas ripped like skin. The ground lifted as if the earth itself was flinching. Jane felt her body thrown across the room. Her head slammed against stone. Her vision burst white. For a moment, she didn't know if she had gone blind. Then, darkness rushed in, thick and suffocating. When the blast haze settled, Jane pushed herself up, coughing against the sudden swirl of smoke. The heat stung her eyes. Flames licked along broken beams. The air tasted of blood and burning oil. Her ears rang sharply. No sound except that endless metallic buzz. She blinked hard as blurry shapes came into focus. Bodies. Bodies everywhere. Stretcher frames snapped in half. Morphine bottles shattered. A sergeant I had joked with an hour earlier lay twisted beneath a slab of stone. And then she saw them. Her unit. The nurses she'd eaten with, cried with, laughed with. The medics who'd teased her for being tougher than the colonel. Her friends, her family out here. All of them motionless. A silence so deep fell inside her chest that it felt like something had died inside her too. Her breath trembled. No, 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 no. She crawled, hands shaking, checking pulses that weren't there, calling names that didn't answer. The ringing in her ears made her feel like she was underwater, drowning in disbelief. Jane pressed her forehead to the arm of Nurse Callahan, the girl who used to trade chocolate with her on cold nights. She whispered, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." A crack of falling timber snapped her back to the present. Flames were spreading fast. The Germans would arrive any minute. Anyone still alive would be shot or burned. Then, through the smoke, she heard it. A faint whimper. A child's whimper. Her head snapped up. This wasn't one of her soldiers. This was a civilian. Another voice cried, older, panicked, foreign. She forced herself to stand. Her legs trembled but held. Her heart felt split open, but she moved anyway. Because if she didn't, more would die. Jane Harris, who had just watched her entire unit perish in front of her, turned toward the sound and stepped deeper into the burning ruins. She had nothing left. No backup, no supplies, no one to call for help. But she still had her hands. And as long as she had hands, she would save whoever she could. Even if they were strangers. Even if it killed her. Smoke curled upward in ghostly spirals as Jane pushed deeper into what remained of the church. Every step crunched on shattered glass and burning debris. Her uniform sleeve had caught fire. She slapped it out without stopping. She couldn't stop, not when someone was alive in here, not when the cries kept echoing through the collapsing walls. A beam crashed down inches from her boots, sending embers spraying across the floor like fireflies. The air was so thick with smoke she could barely breathe, but then she heard it again, closer this time. A child's sob. Jane whispered sharply, "I'm coming, sweetheart, hold on." Her voice came out raw, cracking around the edges. She couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, but she followed the sound with the precision of someone who no longer feared death. She'd already lost everything. The only thing left to lose was time. As she reached the back of the church, the old confessional area, she saw a shadow move behind a broken pillar. Jane ducked beneath a beam and crawled forward. A small boy, maybe 4 or 5, huddled behind a fallen statue of the Virgin Mary. His cheeks streaked with soot, eyes wide with terror. "Hey, it's okay." Jane's voice softened instantly, instinctively. "I've got you now." But before she could reach him, another figure pulled into view. A woman, mid-30s, clutching her leg in agony. Blood pooled beneath her, and her breath came out in sharp, terrified gasps. French words tumbled from her lips, too fast for Jane to understand, but fear was a universal language. "Shh, you're safe," Jane whispered, though she wasn't sure it was true. "I'm going to get you both out." A new sound ripped through the air, the unmistakable grinding roar of tank treads. German armor. Close, too close. Jane's pulse shot through her like electricity. If the enemy reached the ruins before she escaped, they'd be executed on sight. The boy whimpered, burying his face in his mother's shoulder. Ash drifted down like dark snowflakes. Jane steadied herself and made a decision so quickly it didn't even feel like thought. "Can you walk?" she asked the woman, switching to broken French the way she'd learned from local villagers. "Move, even small?" The woman shook her head violently, gripping her leg. The bone was angled wrong. No chance. Jane looked at the little boy, then at the smashed entrance, then back at the woman. She could carry the child easily, but carrying the mother too? Through fire? Through falling rubble? With enemy soldiers closing in? A normal person might have accepted the impossibility, but Jane wasn't normal anymore. She shoved broken wood aside and ripped off a long strip from a half-burned curtain. She tied it tight around the woman's thigh, making her scream through clenched teeth. Jane winced but tightened it more. She had no time to be gentle. The tanks grew louder, their heavy engines vibrating through the ground. Jane lifted the boy into her arms. "Hold on to me. Don't let go." He wrapped his tiny arms around her neck, trembling so hard she could feel the vibrations. His heartbeat fluttered against her chest like a trapped bird. She slid her other arm under the woman's shoulders. "We move now." With a grunt, she pulled the woman upright. Pain shot through Jane's ribs. She hadn't realized she was bleeding there too, but she ignored it. Pain was a luxury she couldn't afford. The church ceiling groaned. A fiery crack split across the wooden beams. Jane dragged the woman, step by brutal step. Each movement felt like lifting a mountain, but she didn't slow down. Her breath turned into sharp, desperate bursts. Halfway across the rubble, her foot slipped on a pool of blood. She staggered, almost falling. The boy cried out. Jane steadied herself, tightening her grip on both of them. "You're okay," she whispered through clenched teeth. "You're okay. We're almost out." A mortar blast shook the earth again, this one closer. The church doors blew inward with a violent burst of air and smoke. Jane froze. Silhouettes appeared in the doorway. German soldiers, rifles up, scanning. She ducked. Behind a fallen column, heart pounding against her ribs so hard she thought it might explode. The boy whimpered. She covered his mouth gently. The soldiers spoke sharply to each other, footsteps crunching closer. Jane's breath came out slow, quiet, controlled. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. A beam cracked overhead like a gunshot. Flames roared higher. A coughing fit rumbled through the burning debris, one of the soldiers. Jane risked a glance. The smoke was too thick, visibility too low. The Germans spread out, searching the ruins. Jane whispered to the woman, so softly the flames almost drowned her voice. "When I move, you move. Don't look back." She waited, timed her breaths, listened to the steps. And then, with death only feet away, Jane Harris did the impossible. She stood, lifted the woman higher, held the little boy tighter, and ran straight through the burning ruins toward the only gap in the collapsing wall, without making a single sound. The night outside the collapsing church wasn't a night anymore. It was a battlefield breathing fire. Tracer rounds sliced across the sky like burning comets, lighting the broken village in flashes of red and orange. The air carried the sharp smell of gunpowder, wet earth, and death. Jane burst out of the gap in the stone wall, the little boy clinging to her neck like a lifeline, the wounded woman slumped against her shoulder. Her legs moved on instinct, fueled by adrenaline and raw terror. She could feel heat licking at her back as the rest of the church finally gave way behind her, collapsing into a roaring inferno. But she couldn't look back. She wouldn't. The Germans were still inside, still searching, still seconds away from realizing 3 people had slipped past them in the smoke. Her boots hit the muddy ground hard, slipping for half a second before she stabilized. The woman groaned in agony. The boy buried his face into Jane's shoulder, trembling non-stop. "Shh, stay quiet," Jane whispered, even though her own breath was ragged and uneven. A spotlight swept across the ruined street, German patrol. Jane froze behind the corner of a half-demolished bakery. The beam of light passed inches from her boots. Too close. Her heart pounded so loudly she was convinced the soldiers could hear it. She forced her body to flatten against the cold brick wall, feeling every tremor in the boy's tiny frame, every painful breath from the mother. She closed her eyes and inhaled sharply. She had no map, no backup, no weapon, and no plan. Just 3 lives balanced on her shoulders. The spotlight paused. For a terrifying moment it hovered, sweeping slowly back, as if someone had noticed the fresh footprints in the mud. Jane didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't move a single muscle. Finally, the light drifted away again. She exhaled so quietly it barely made a sound. But she knew she couldn't stay here. German armor was rolling in. Infantry patrols were spreading out. The front line had collapsed faster than expected. In minutes, this entire area would be crawling with soldiers, and anyone found alive would be killed or taken prisoner. Jane tightened her grip and whispered, "We head to the woods. It's our only chance." The woman nodded weakly, sweat dripping down her pale face. The boy gave a small whimper but didn't protest. Maybe he understood. Maybe even children sensed when death was hunting them. Jane moved quickly but carefully along the shadowed side of the buildings. Every few steps she paused, listening for German voices, watching for shifting light. A truck rumbled past, its headlights cutting through the dusk. Jane pressed her deeper into the shadows, holding both lives against her like fragile glass. She counted the seconds until the engine faded. Then she moved again. The village ended abruptly where the land dipped into a narrow trail leading toward a thick line of trees. The woods. Safety. Darkness. Cover. Almost there. Almost. A gunshot cracked behind her. Jane's blood turned to ice. She whipped around. Flames from the destroyed church cast a faint glow behind her, and in that glow she saw 3 German soldiers stepping out of the smoke, rifles raised. They had spotted her. "Run," Jane hissed to the woman. "Don't stop. Just go." The woman tried, but her leg buckled instantly, her body crashing into Jane's side. The boy gasped and clung tighter. Another shot rang out, close, very close. Jane crouched low, dragging both civilians with her as she ducked behind a pile of rubble. Bullets hit the wall above her, sending chunks of stone flying. She clenched her jaw. She wasn't losing them. Not after losing her whole unit. Not tonight. She used her body as a shield, curling protectively around the boy as a third bullet tore through the wooden beam behind her, inches from her shoulder. Splinters stung her cheek. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. She whispered, "Close your eyes. Trust me." Her mind raced with options. None good, none safe. But then she saw it. A drainage ditch running along the eastern edge of the village, half hidden by weeds and broken fencing. Deep enough, dark enough, if she could reach it. Another gunshot blasted sparks off the stone above her head. No more time. Jane grabbed the woman's wrist. "Craw, now!" She dragged them both into motion. Mud coated her palms. Sharp rocks tore her knees. The gunfire kept coming, each shot a reminder that death was sprinting toward them. The ditch was 15 feet away. 10, 7. A bullet hit the ground beside her hand, spraying dirt into her eyes. She blinked furiously, refusing to stop. 5 feet. 3. She lunged forward, pulling the boy and woman with the last strength in her body, and all 3 tumbled into the ditch just as another volley of gunfire ripped across the field above their heads. Jane landed hard, pain exploding in her ribs. But they were hidden, covered, alive. She pressed her body flat against the wet ground, clutching the boy to her chest as German boots thundered past only inches above the ditch rim. The soldier shouted orders. They didn't see her, didn't hear her, didn't know she was right below them. Jane closed her eyes. For the first time since the explosion, she allowed herself one breath. Shaky, painful, desperate. They had survived. For now. The ditch was colder than Jane expected. Cold in a way that bit straight through torn fabric and bruised skin. Mud clung to her palms like glue. The boy hid his face in her chest, trembling violently. The wounded woman lay on her side, gripping the dirt with white knuckles, trying not to scream from the pain in her shattered leg. Above them, German boots pounded the ground. Shadows crossed the rim of the ditch, long and sharp under the moonlight. Jane's breath froze in her throat as rifle barrels angled down for a brief, terrifying moment. If even one soldier crouched, if even one thought to check. But the patrol moved on, voices fading into the night. Jane waited. She didn't move, didn't trust her lungs. She counted to 60, then 100, then another 30. Only when silence settled, thin, fragile, dangerous, did she whisper, "We're moving, slowly." The woman nodded, biting her lip hard enough to bleed. Jane slid her arm under her shoulders again and pulled her up. The boy clutched her collar, refusing to let go. They crawled along the ditch, inch by painful inch. The mud squelched beneath them, masking their movements but chilling them to the bone. Jane's muscles burned, her ribs screamed. Her head throbbed from where she'd slammed it against stone earlier. Every part of her body wanted to collapse. But she didn't. She couldn't. The forest edge was only a few hundred feet away now, dark, thick, alive with crickets and the rustling of leaves. If they reached it, they had a chance. A small one, but a chance. Behind them, the village glowed in the faint orange of distant flames. Smoke drifted upward like a dying soul. Somewhere in that fire were the bodies of her friends, her unit, her family. The weight of that truth nearly crushed her. But Jane didn't allow herself to look back, not even once. A distant shout snapped her attention forward, German voices, several of them. They were spreading out in multiple directions. Jane froze, listened. Boots on gravel, boots on wood, boots on soil. Then the distinct, chilling sound of a flare gun. A bright green flare shot into the sky, bursting into sickly light. The whole field was illuminated in a ghostly glow. The boy gasped. Jane clapped a hand over his mouth gently but firmly, whispering, "Shh, it's okay, just breathe with me." Her own heart hammered against her ribs like a fist. The ditch wasn't enough cover now. If a patrol walked past at the wrong angle, they'd see all three of them immediately. She needed another plan, fast. She scanned the ditch, nothing but mud, roots, and loose stones. Then she spotted it. A narrow tunnel-like runoff pipe where the ditch narrowed. It looked barely wide enough for one person, let alone three. But it angled toward the forest. It was their only shot. Jane crawled toward it. "We're going through there." The Frenchwoman's eyes widened in terror, but Jane squeezed her hand. "It's this or death. I won't let anything happen to you." With great effort, she helped slide the woman into the pipe first, careful to protect her shattered leg from the sharp edges. The woman whimpered but didn't resist. Next, Jane pushed the boy in. "Keep crawling, sweetheart. I'm right behind you. Don't stop." Then she followed, shoulders scraping the metal, ribs screaming. The pipe was pitch black, smelling of rust and wet soil. She had barely a few inches of space to breathe. Every few feet, she had to shove hard to move the woman's weight forward. Outside, the flare's green light washed across the ditch. Shouting, footsteps. Closer, closer. Boots right above the pipe opening. Jane froze mid-crawl. Her heart pounded so violently it felt like it shook the metal around her. The boy trembled, and Jane placed her hand on his back, grounding him. "Stay still," she whispered. The soldiers paused. A soldier muttered something. Another answered. Jane held her breath. The soldiers moved on. Jane exhaled slowly, controlling the flood of relief that threatened to break her focus. They crawled forward, the pipe curving slightly downward toward the forest. The air grew cooler, quieter. Leaves rustled softly ahead. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, the pipe opened into the shadows of the woods. Jane slid out first, helping the boy out gently, then pulling the woman free with all the strength she had left. The forest canopy swallowed them whole. Dark, dense, protective. Jane collapsed onto her knees, chest heaving, sweat mixing with soot and blood. For the first time since the explosion, she felt the night breeze on her face. They were out, alive, but not safe. Gunfire echoed faintly from the village. German dogs began barking in the distance. The hunt had officially begun. And Jane Harris knew the forest would test her in ways the battlefield never had. The forest swallowed the night like a giant mouth, silent, endless, and full of unseen eyes. Jane tightened her grip on the boy's hand while keeping her other arm locked under the wounded woman's shoulders. Branches snapped softly beneath her boots. Damp leaves brushed against her face, cool against her fever-hot skin. Somewhere behind them, the German dogs barked again. Closer this time. Jane's heart pitched sharply, but her voice stayed steady as she whispered, "We keep moving, slow, steady, no noise." The woman nodded, pale and shaking. The boy clung to Jane's sleeve, too scared to cry. Even his breath came out quietly. The forest floor sloped downward, the earth soft with moss and fallen needles. Jane slipped twice, but caught herself each time. The pain in her ribs flared bright, but she pushed it down. Pain didn't matter. Surviving did. A twig snapped behind them. Not theirs. Jane froze. The boy froze. The woman froze. Another snap. Heavy, ugly. The kind of sound boots make on dead branches. German soldiers had entered the forest. Jane scanned frantically for shelter. The trees were tall but thin, clustered tightly together. No caves, no ditches, no houses, just a sea of shadows. But then she saw it. A narrow deer trail winding deeper into the woods, partly hidden by low ferns, almost invisible from a distance. "Follow me," she whispered, guiding them into the brush. They crouched and moved along the trail, branches brushing their backs. Jane kept her head low, listening to every rustle, every shift, every breath. Voices echoed behind them, German, harsh, commanding. Then the chilling sound of a whistle. They were coordinating positions. Jane's stomach dropped. This wasn't just a search. This was a sweep. She tightened her grip on the boy. "We're almost safe," she whispered, even though she wasn't sure, even though the fear in her chest felt like it was clawing up her throat. The boy looked up at her with wide, terrified eyes, trusting her more than he trusted the world. She couldn't fail him. They reached a fork in the deer trail. One path led deeper into darkness, no moonlight. The other curved toward a stream. Jane made her choice instantly. Water could mask footsteps, could hide scent, could buy time. "Left," she whispered. The woman hesitated, trembling. "Oh, water, cold," she murmured through clenched teeth. "I know," Jane said softly, "but it's safer. We go." She slid her arm around the woman again, guiding her gently. The woman tried to put weight on her good leg and almost collapsed. Jane braced her, pulling her upright. "You're strong," Jane whispered, "stronger than you think." The woman's eyes filled with tears, not of pain, but of belief. Somehow, Jane's voice was enough to keep her moving. They reached a fork in the deer trail. One path led deeper into darkness, no moonlight. The other curved toward a stream. Jane made her choice instantly. Water could mask footsteps, could hide scent, could buy time. "Left," she whispered. The woman hesitated, trembling. "Oh, water, cold," she murmured through clenched teeth. "I know," Jane said softly, "but it's safer. We go." She slid her arm around the woman again, guiding her gently. The woman tried to put weight on her good leg and almost collapsed. Jane braced her, pulling her upright. "You're strong," Jane whispered, "stronger than you think." The woman's eyes filled with tears, not of pain, but of belief. Somehow, Jane's voice was enough to keep her moving. They reached the stream, narrow but fast-moving, the water rushing over smooth stones. Moonlight glimmered faintly across its surface. Jane stepped in first. The icy shock shot up her legs like lightning. She hissed under her breath, but forced herself deeper. The current pressed against her shins. "Step where I step," she whispered. The woman waded in beside her, gasping sharply at the cold. The boy whimpered as the water touched his feet, but Jane picked him up, cradling him against her chest. The dogs barked again. Closer. Jane's pulse spiked. She moved faster, stepping carefully over slippery stones. Water splashed around her legs, the sound too loud in the quiet night. She gritted her teeth. Quiet, quiet. They followed the stream for nearly 50 yards until the bank sloped upward into thick shrubs. Jane lifted the boy onto the bank first, then helped the woman crawl out, grunting with the effort. Mud smeared their legs and hands. Then, flashlights. Dozens of beams flickering through the trees. Jane dropped instantly, pressing the boy flat against the earth. The woman lay beside them, covering her mouth to stifle a scream. German soldiers pushed through the woods, flashlights slicing through the dark. Their boots shook the earth. Their dogs barked wildly, pulling at leashes, sniffing for the scent that should have been easy to follow. But the water bought them seconds. Seconds that meant everything. One soldier paused near the stream's edge. He shone his flashlight across the bank, the beam sliding dangerously to Jane's boot. Jane didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't move, even when a mosquito bit her neck. The soldier muttered something, then lifted his radio. Another soldier answered from deeper in the forest. Commands, orders, movement. Then, miraculously, the soldier shifted direction, heading farther upriver, away from them. Jane waited another 60 seconds, 90, 100. Only when she was sure, absolutely sure, did she whisper, "We move again." She stood slowly, her body trembling from cold and exhaustion, then looked at the boy and the woman. "We're still alive," she whispered, "so we keep going." And, for the first time since the explosion, a tiny spark lit inside her chest. Hope. Not big, not enough to rely on, but enough to walk one more step into the darkness. Snow drifted sideways across the ruined ridgeline, carried by a wind so sharp it felt like needles across the skin. Jane Harris pushed forward anyway, her boots sinking into crusted white powder that had swallowed men, machines, and memories whole. The forest ahead looked like a graveyard of splintered trees, each trunk shattered by artillery, each branch drooping under winter's weight. And yet, somewhere in that frozen maze, she knew there were still survivors, or at least the chance of one. Her breath came out in ragged clouds, She'd been moving for hours with no compass, no map, and no guarantee she was going in the right direction. But the truth was, she didn't need any of that. She only needed one thing: the promise she made to herself when her unit died around her. If even one person needed help, she would not turn back. Behind her, the forest lay silent. Too silent. That kind of silence didn't feel natural. It felt like something was listening, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. But Jane's senses were sharper now. Trauma had carved her into something half wild, half soldier. She knew when danger breathed near her, and danger was close. She crouched low near a fallen pine, brushing away fresh snow to search for signs, tracks, blood, anything. Nothing. Just white emptiness. But as she stood again, a faint crack echoed somewhere behind her, soft but unmistakable, a branch snapping. She froze. Her pulse hammered the inside of her skull. She lowered herself behind the tree trunk, one gloved hand gripping the MP40 she'd picked up from the battlefield. Her own rifle had been destroyed in the blast that took her squad. Everything about her felt borrowed now: her gun, her direction, her strength. But borrowed or not, it was all she had. Another crack. Then, voices. German voices. She pressed her back to the tree, squeezing her eyes shut to focus. 2 men, maybe 3. They were moving carefully, as if following something, tracking, hunting. Probably her. She waited until their boots sank closer in the snow. 15 feet. 10. She could hear their breathing now. One of them laughed softly and said something she couldn't translate, but his tone was enough. Arrogant, confident. They believed they had her. She inhaled once, held it. Then she stepped out. 3 quick bursts, clean, controlled. One man dropped instantly. The other 2 dived for cover. A bullet ripped bark inches from her face. She didn't panic. She slid across the snow, firing again, eyes fixed, breath steady. The second man's helmet flew off as he collapsed. The last one yelled something, panic this time, and ran. She didn't chase. That wasn't her purpose. Survival was never her goal. Saving was. So she kept moving. The forest thickened into a corridor of fractured branches that looked like frozen claws. But somewhere up ahead, a faint glow shimmered through the trees. At first, she thought it was fire. Then she realized it flickered too softly for that. A lantern. She dropped low and crept toward it. The smell of smoke grew heavier. She reached the edge of a narrow clearing and saw a small dugout bunker, half collapsed, half buried. The lantern glowed weakly from inside. And then, a cough. Light, fragile, human. Jane's chest tightened. She slid down the snowy slope and stopped at the entrance. Her fingers brushed aside hanging branches and debris, revealing a narrow space inside, where a young American radio man lay slumped against a wall. He couldn't have been more than 20, maybe 19. His leg was wrapped in a blood-soaked bandage that had frozen stiff. He lifted his head when she entered, eyes glassy, breath rattling. Am I dead?" he whispered. "No," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "But you will be soon if you stay here." His lips twitched, something like a smile trying to form. "You're with the medics?" She hesitated. Once, yes. Now she was something else, something built from fire and loss. "I'm with whoever needs me," she answered. He swallowed hard, gripping her sleeve. "There were others." Jane leaned closer. "Where?" He pointed weakly toward the far side of the clearing. "A farmhouse, blown apart, but I heard voices, crying. I think civilians." Civilians. Her mission deepened instantly. She pulled a morphine syringe from her pocket, the last one, and pressed it into his arm. "I'll be back for you," she whispered. Snow howled outside the bunker like a living thing. Jane rose, tightened her scarf, gripped her weapon, and stepped back into the storm, following the trail toward the unknown, toward the next soul that needed saving. The storm didn't let up. It clawed at her face, tore at her coat, dragged her hair loose like a living creature determined to slow her down. But Jane Harris pushed forward, leaning into the wind, as if she could physically force the world to bend with her will. The radio man's words echoed through her mind. A farmhouse, civilians, crying. In this frozen hell, that meant one thing: danger was closing in. The forest opened into a wide stretch of snow-covered open ground. The moon pressed weak light through the clouds, just enough to reveal the silhouette of what once had been a farmhouse. Now it looked like a broken skeleton, roof torn away, walls shredded by artillery. Smoke still curled from the wreckage, drifting like ghosts through the air. Jane didn't walk toward it. She moved like a shadow. Every step placed carefully, every sound measured. Because if there were survivors, there could also be Germans waiting. She dropped into a crouch near a shattered wagon. Snow had gathered inside it, filling it like a coffin. She scanned the area. No movement, no armed figures. Just the faint sound of the wind slipping through cracks in the ruined house. Then she heard it. A muffled sob. Not loud, but desperate, human. She slipped around the corner, pressing her shoulder into the splintered frame for cover. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of burned wood, wet ash, and something metallic. Blood. A single lantern flickered weakly in the far room, weak light dancing over rubble. Her heart sank. Bodies. 2 adults, lying near the doorway, covered in snow, as if the storm was trying to bury the evidence of their suffering. But the sob wasn't coming from them. It came from deeper inside. She stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, and whispered, "Hello, I'm American. I'm here to help." The sobbing stopped immediately. Silence. Then a small voice, trembling. "Don't hurt us." Jane's breath caught. Kids. She lowered her weapon, letting it hang against her thigh as she approached the back room. The lantern cast just enough light to reveal 2 small figures huddled behind an overturned table. A little boy and a girl, maybe 6 or 7. The boy held a piece of broken wood like a weapon, shaking so hard it almost slipped from his hands. Jane knelt in front of them. "It's okay," she whispered, voice barely audible over the wind. "I'm here to take you somewhere safe." The girl peeked up, her big eyes glistening with tears. "Are you a nurse?" she asked. Jane nodded. "Yes." The girl crawled forward suddenly and threw her arms around Jane's neck with a force that shocked her. Jane held her, feeling the small shoulders trembling against her chest. The boy still stayed back, eyes darting. "Where is your family?" Jane asked gently. The girl's voice cracked. They're sleeping. They won't wake up." Jane swallowed hard. The storm outside echoed their grief, shrieking around the broken house like a cry of its own. She tightened her grip for a moment, then pulled back. "We have to leave," she whispered. "It's not safe here." The boy stepped forward at last. "Will the soldiers come back?" Jane met his eyes. Fear lived there, but so did something stronger, survival. She touched his shoulder. "They won't," she said firmly. "I won't let them." She gathered the girl into her arms, and the boy held on to the hem of her coat as they made their way out. But the moment she stepped outside, her gut twisted. Tracks. Fresh ones. Not hers. Not the children's. German boots. 3 sets, leading straight toward the farmhouse. She cursed quietly under her breath and crouched low. The farmhouse was surrounded by broken fencing, now her only cover. She moved quickly, ushering the children behind sections of fallen timber. Snow whipped across her vision, swirling in frantic gusts. Then she heard them. Voices. Laughing. Talking casually. The enemy was close. Too close. She guided the children behind a toppled beam and whispered, "Stay here. Don't move. Not a sound." The boy nodded, pressing a hand over her sister's mouth as Jane slipped away. She moved with the cold precision of someone who had nothing left to lose. The storm cloaked her steps, each movement silent, deadly. She reached the side of a crumbling chimney and peered around. 3 German soldiers approached the farmhouse, rifles slung loosely, unaware that the woman they'd been hunting all night was only a few feet away, watching, measuring, waiting. One soldier kicked the door open. The house was empty. They'd realize soon she had beaten them to the children. Jane tightened her grip on the MP40. Tonight wasn't about revenge. Tonight wasn't about survival. Tonight was about 2 terrified souls behind a broken beam. She exhaled slowly and stepped into the storm. Jane crouched in the swirling snow, the children frozen behind her like tiny shadows. Every nerve screamed, every muscle coiled for the next move. She could hear the Germans moving inside the ruined farmhouse, their boots scuffing the splintered floors, voices raised in careless chatter. But she had no choice. She couldn't wait for them to find the children. Time was a predator now. She crept along the edge of the clearing, each step careful, measured, slipping through snow that wanted to betray her with every crunch. The boy's tiny fingers clutched her coat. The girl pressed close against her chest, shivering violently. She whispered softly, "Almost there. Just a few more steps." The forest ahead promised cover, thick evergreens, black shadows, silence that swallowed sound. But it was a long, treacherous path through open ground. One wrong move, and bullets would turn the snow red before she could blink. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her, the German soldiers hunting like wolves. A gust of wind tore through the clearing, scattering snowflakes like ash. Jane froze mid-step, squinting through the blizzard. Then she saw it. A narrow gap in the tree line, just big enough for her and the children. It was the difference between life and death. She signaled the children silently, crouching low, urging them to follow. As they reached the gap, a rifle barked from the farmhouse. A bullet kicked up snow near Jane's boots. She shoved the children down, pressed them flat against the earth, and crawled forward. Another shot rang out, ricocheting off the ruins. She felt the girl's small hands clutching her coat. "I'm scared," the girl whispered. "I know," Jane said, voice steady but soft. "But we're almost safe. Keep moving. Don't stop." Step by step, they crossed the open ground. Jane's eyes scanned constantly, taking in every shadow, every flicker of movement, every sign that the enemy might have noticed them. She was a predator now, but one driven by protection rather than violence. Her entire life had distilled into a single focus: get the children out alive. Finally, they reached the forest's edge. Jane breathed a silent prayer, grateful for the dense trees that could hide them. She ducked behind a large pine, sliding the children down to the ground. Their breaths puffed in small clouds, eyes wide, fear etched deep into their young faces. "Quiet now," Jane whispered, brushing snow from the girl's hair. "We wait here for a moment, then we keep going." A branch snapped somewhere to their left. Jane froze instantly, muscles tight, eyes scanning. Nothing visible. Probably just the wind, or maybe an animal. But every second felt stretched thin, every heartbeat loud. She pressed herself against the tree, the children clinging, and waited. The wind died down slightly. Moonlight filtered through the branches, showing the twisted remnants of the farmhouse behind them. Jane's mind raced. What next? The children were weak, exhausted, and terrified. She had to keep moving, but every path seemed more dangerous than the last. Then she heard a faint sound. Footsteps crunching on snow, far off, but growing louder. Not German, not military, human. Relief surged in her chest. Civilians? Perhaps a partisan group? Anyone who could help, guide them away from the patrols and into safety. She moved cautiously, signaling the children to follow. The boy clung to her coat. The girl pressed close against her chest, trembling but silent. Every branch, every tree, every shadow could hide a threat, but also could be a path to survival. A clearing appeared up ahead, moonlight spilling over snow-covered rocks. Jane scanned it, chest tight, calculating distances, imagining the bullets that could end this flight in an instant. Nothing. Empty. Safe. For now. She lowered the children gently to the snow, checking their faces. The girl's lips were blue from cold. The boy's teeth chattered. Jane wrapped her coat around them, shivering herself, but determined. Every snug of exhaustion, pain, and fear was set aside. Only the mission mattered. Finally, they reached the forest's edge. Jane breathed a silent prayer, grateful for the dense trees that could hide them. She ducked behind a large pine, sliding the children down to the ground. Their breaths puffed in small clouds, eyes wide, fear etched deep into their young faces. "Quiet now," Jane whispered. "We wait here for a moment, then we keep going." A branch snapped somewhere to their left. Jane froze instantly, muscles tight, eyes scanning. Nothing visible. Probably just the wind, or maybe an animal. But every second felt stretched thin, every heartbeat loud. She pressed herself against the tree, the children clinging, and waited. The wind died down slightly. Moonlight filtered through the branches, showing the twisted remnants of the farmhouse behind them. Jane's mind raced. What next? The children were weak, exhausted, and terrified. She had to keep moving, but every path seemed more dangerous than the last. Then she heard a faint sound, footsteps crunching on snow, far off but growing louder. Not German, not military, human. Relief surged in her chest. Civilians? Perhaps a partisan group? Anyone who could help, guide them away from the patrols and into safety. She moved cautiously, signaling the children to follow. The boy clung to her coat. The girl pressed against her chest, trembling but silent. Every branch, every tree, every shadow could hide a threat, but also could be a path to survival. A clearing appeared up ahead, moonlight spilling over snow-covered rocks. Jane scanned it, chest tight, calculating distances, imagining trajectories, imagining the bullets that could end this flight in an instant. Nothing. Empty. Safe. For now. She lowered the children gently to the snow, checking their faces. The girl's lips were blue from cold. The boy's teeth chattered. Jane wrapped her coat around them as best she could, shivering herself. But only the mission mattered. "Stay close," she whispered. "We're not safe yet, but we're closer, much closer." Above, the storm howled, snow stinging their faces. Jane pressed them closer to her, feeling the tiny pulse of life in each of them. Somehow, against all odds, she had gotten them this far. But she knew, this night was far from over. Every step forward would be harder. Every sound could be the last. And yet, Jane Harris, who had survived the destruction of her unit, the fire, the bullets, and the storm, kept moving. One step at a time. One breath at a time. One heartbeat at a time. Because giving up wasn't an option. Because someone had to survive. Because she was Jane Harris. The forest thickened as Jane pushed forward, every branch and gnarled root a potential trap. Snow clung to her coat and hair, melting with her sweat and the heat of adrenaline. The children clung to her sides, their small bodies trembling, teeth chattering from cold and fear. But she didn't slow. Survival demanded motion, and she had no time to consider exhaustion or pain. The faint glow of a distant farmhouse flickered through the trees. Another ruined structure, partially hidden by shadows. Jane paused to study it, realizing that shelter might be closer than she thought. But the snow between them and the building was an open expanse, and open spaces were deadly. One wrong step, one flash of movement, and they'd be visible to German patrols still scouring the area. She crouched low, guiding the children behind her as she surveyed the terrain. The boy's fingers tightened on her sleeve. The girl buried her face into her chest. Jane whispered, "Almost there. Keep moving, stay close, and don't look up." Step by careful step, they crossed the snow, the wind whipping violently. Ice and mud conspired to pull them down, but she kept them moving, dragging the girl with one arm, keeping the boy close with the other. Snowflakes stung their skin like tiny needles, but they couldn't stop. Not yet, not while danger loomed. A sudden sound froze them. A low, distant shout carried across the clearing. Jane's heart jumped. German? Civilian? She couldn't tell. She pressed the children to the ground, the snow muffling their breaths. Her eyes scanned the darkness, searching for a clue. Movement flickered, a shadow passing behind broken fencing. Boots crunching on snow. Jane gritted her teeth. She couldn't fight everyone. She couldn't outrun everyone. But she could think. And thinking was what had kept her alive this long. She crawled forward, dragging the children behind her into a cluster of fallen trees. The branches offered a precarious shield, their twisted shapes hiding them from immediate view. Jane pressed herself against a thick trunk, listening. Footsteps echoed closer. The boy whimpered, gripping her coat. She brushed his hair back. "Shh, quiet, don't move." The footsteps paused, and she heard voices speaking in German. Commands, harsh, urgent. They were searching for something, or someone. Probably her. Probably the children, too. Jane's mind raced. She couldn't stay here forever. But the faint glow ahead, the farmhouse, was a beacon of hope. If they could reach it, they might find supplies, food, or even a local partisan to help them get further. She waited, counting breaths, seconds, heartbeats. Then she led the children, one careful movement at a time, across the remaining open ground. Bullets kicked up snow nearby, but none hit. By some miracle or sheer skill, they reached the edge of the next line of trees. The farmhouse loomed closer, partially collapsed but intact enough to offer shelter. Jane moved quickly but cautiously. She peeked around the corner. The building appeared empty, though faint smoke still curled from the chimney. It was safe, for now. She ushered the children inside, closing a broken door behind them. The room was cold, dust and debris everywhere, but it was dry. Jane lowered the children to the floor, brushing snow from their coats. The boy shivered violently. The girl's lips blew. Jane wrapped her coat around them, pulling them as close as she could. She allowed herself a moment to breathe. Her own body was battered, ribs sore, muscles screaming, face streaked with soot and frostbite. But she pushed the pain down. Not yet. Outside, the wind howled through the broken roof and shattered windows. Somewhere, distant, German voices still searched the forest. Jane closed her eyes for a second, listening. Every sound was a threat, but also a guide. She had to keep moving. There were more lives out there. Civilians, survivors. She couldn't stop now. The children whispered softly. Jane leaned down to hear them. "Are we safe?" the girl asked. Jane's voice was calm, resolute. "For a moment, but we can't stay long. We have to keep going." She stood, peering through the broken window at the snow-covered landscape. Moonlight reflected off frozen branches, illuminating the path forward. Somewhere in that darkness were more lives to save, more danger to survive. Jane tightened her coat around herself and the children, gripping the MP40 she still carried. This night was far from over. The storm, the enemy, the cold, they were relentless. But Jane Harris had survived worse. And tonight, she would not let fear control her. Not for her, not for the children. She whispered softly to herself, "Only a prayer. One step at a time. We survive. We save them." And with that, Jane Harris stepped into the shadows again, leading the children deeper into the forest, where danger lurked at every turn. And courage was the only weapon that would see them through. The forest seemed endless, a frozen labyrinth of jagged trees and snow-laden branches. Jane Harris led the children with precision born of exhaustion and fear, every step calculated to avoid snapping twigs or shifting debris. The boy clutched her sleeve, the girl's arms wrapped around her neck, shivering violently. Their small bodies were fragile, yet they were all that mattered now. The wind howled, carrying with it the faint echo of distant gunfire. Jane's senses were stretched to the limit. Every rustle, every shadow, every subtle movement could be the enemy, or a threat far deadlier than bullets. She didn't flinch. She had no time to. Every step was life or death. Through the darkness, a faint glow appeared. Another farmhouse, partially obscured by a line of twisted pines. Jane's heart tightened. Shelter meant warmth, food, and possibly someone to help guide them further. But the open stretch of snow leading to it was exposed. Too exposed. She pressed herself against a fallen tree. The children huddled beneath her coat and studied the terrain. "Almost there," she whispered, her voice steady despite the ache in her lungs and muscles. "Keep close. Don't make a sound." The children nodded, eyes wide and trusting. Step by painstaking step, Jane led them across the open snow. A stray branch snapped nearby, but instinct and sheer timing kept them hidden. Bullets kicked up snow, but none struck them. Miraculously, or by skill, they made it to the edge of the tree line. Jane glanced back. The shadows of the forest stretched behind them, empty for the moment, but she knew the Germans were searching. Every second counted. Every heartbeat was precious. The farmhouse loomed larger now, a fragile promise against the oppressive night. Jane slipped inside through a broken side door, guiding the children with hands firm but gentle. Inside, the room was cold, dust and debris scattered across the floor, but it offered refuge. She helped the children sit, brushing snow from their coats and wrapping them in whatever she could spare. "Are we safe?" the girl asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "For now," Jane replied, "but we have to keep moving soon." She looked around the room, quickly taking stock. The fireplace was intact. She could start a small fire for warmth. There were a few broken cabinets and crates, likely nothing valuable, but perhaps something to help. Jane moved quietly, pulling matches from her pocket, striking them one by one. The flame caught. Soon, a small fire crackled weakly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the broken walls. The boy leaned against her side, teeth chattering. Jane wrapped him tighter in her coat. The girl leaned into her chest, exhausted, shivering violently. Jane's own body screamed for rest, but she didn't allow herself to collapse. Not yet. The mission demanded vigilance, and sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. Outside, the wind rattled the broken windows. Somewhere in the distance, German voices shouted, rifles cracking the night. Jane's ears twitched with every sound, alert, analyzing, anticipating. The danger wasn't gone. It had only paused. She turned to the children. "We stay here until dawn," she whispered. "Then we move. Keep close, stay quiet, and trust me." The children nodded, eyes wide and trusting. Step by painstaking step, Jane led them across the open snow. A stray branch snapped nearby, but instant and sheer timing kept them hidden. Bullets kicked up snow, but none struck them. Miraculously, or by skill, they made it to the edge of the tree line. Jane glanced back. The shadows of the forest stretched behind them, empty for the moment, but she knew the Germans were searching. Every second counted. Every heartbeat was precious. The farmhouse loomed larger now, a fragile promise against the oppressive night. Jane slipped inside through a broken side door, guiding the children with hands firm but gentle. Inside, the room was cold, dust and debris scattered across the floor, but it offered refuge. She helped the children sit, brushing snow from their coats and wrapping them in whatever she could spare. "Are we safe?" the girl asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "For now," Jane replied, "but we have to keep moving soon." She looked around the room, quickly taking stock. The fireplace was intact. She could start a small fire for warmth. There were a few broken cabinets and crates, likely nothing valuable, but perhaps something to help. Jane moved quietly, pulling matches from her pocket, striking them one by one. The flame caught. Soon, a small fire crackled weakly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the broken walls. The boy leaned against her side, teeth chattering. The girl leaned into her chest, exhausted, shivering violently. Jane's own body screamed for rest, but she didn't allow herself to collapse. Not yet. The mission demanded vigilance, and sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. Outside, the wind rattled the broken windows. Somewhere in the distance, German voices shouted, rifles cracking the night. Jane's ears twitched with every sound, alert, analyzing, anticipating. The danger wasn't gone. It had only paused. She turned to the children. "We stay here until dawn," she whispered. "Then we move. Keep close, stay quiet, and trust me." The girl's lips quivered. "Will we be okay?" Jane placed her hand over the child's small face. "Yes, we will survive. I won't let anything happen to you." Her words carried weight, not empty reassurance. They were the promise of someone who had seen death and survived it. Someone who had carried hope through fire, bullets, and collapsing ruins. Jane stared out the broken window, watching the moonlight glint off the snow, mapping potential paths for when they had to leave. Every instinct screamed at her to move, to protect, to survive. The forest beyond the farmhouse was still dangerous, still hunted, but the fire gave them warmth, a moment of reprieve. She sank to the floor, leaning against the wall, eyes scanning the children as they slowly fell asleep against her chest. Exhaustion pressed heavy, but she remained vigilant. Outside, the night stretched on, howling, relentless. Jane Harris did not falter. She would not. Because in the frozen darkness, with enemies hunting and hope fading, she had become more than a soldier. She had become a guardian, and no force in the world, storm, enemy, or death itself, would break her resolve. The night was relentless, a living force of wind, snow, and shadows. Jane Harris pressed forward, guiding the children silently through the forest. Every step was deliberate, calculated, as if one wrong move could expose them to the enemy lurking somewhere in the dark. The boy clung to her sleeve. The girl's arms were wrapped around her neck. Fear radiated from their small bodies, but Jane's resolve held firm. Moonlight slanted through the trees, casting long, jagged shadows across the snow-covered ground. Jane's breath came out in short, visible bursts, mingling with the cold night air. Each crunch beneath her boots felt deafening, though she knew it was the silence of the forest that was truly dangerous. Somewhere out there, German patrols moved, searching, hunting. They reached a frozen stream, narrow but fast-flowing. The icy current could conceal tracks, mask movement, and provide a brief barrier against pursuit. Jane led the children carefully to the edge, testing the stability of the frozen surface. Each step was slow, deliberate, as ice threatened to crack underfoot. The boy's small hand shook in hers. "Almost across," she whispered. "Stay with me. Don't look down." The girl's lips were blue, teeth chattering violently. Jane held her tighter against her chest, murmuring soft reassurances. Every sense screamed danger, yet she kept moving. The far bank of the stream promised trees, shelter, and cover from the open ground behind them. A sudden shout shattered the fragile quiet. German voices, urgent, commanding, angry. Jane froze. She pressed herself low, hiding behind a snow-dusted rock while keeping the children close. A stray bullet struck the ice near her feet, sending shards scattering. The boy whimpered, and Jane clenched her jaw, forcing calm into her voice. "Stay quiet. We're fine. Just breathe." The soldiers passed, unaware of their presence, and Jane exhaled silently. Survival had always required patience and timing, and she had mastered both. She led the children across the final stretch of the stream, ice groaning beneath them, hearts pounding in sync with each cautious step. Once across, the forest thickened. Snow-laden branches hung low, providing concealment from the moonlight. Jane moved carefully, feeling her body ache with cold and exhaustion. The children were struggling, but she adjusted her pace, offering encouragement without slowing too much. Every second in this forest could be the difference between life and death. Ahead, a faint glow flickered through the trees, a cabin, partially obscured by evergreens. Jane's heart leapt. Shelter, warmth, perhaps food, perhaps someone who could guide them to safety. But the stretch of open ground between them and the cabin was treacherous. She pressed herself against a fallen tree, studying the terrain. "Almost there," she whispered. "Stay low. Don't make a sound." Step by cautious step, she led them forward. Snowflakes stung their faces, cold and sharp, but they kept moving. Bullets kicked up snow nearby, grazing the ground and sending powdery clouds into the air. Jane's eyes flicked constantly, scanning for movement, analyzing shadows, calculating every possible threat. Finally, they reached the cabin's edge. Jane ushered the children inside, closing the broken door behind them. The interior was cold, debris scattered across the floor, but it offered temporary refuge. She helped the children sit, brushing snow from their coats and wrapping them in layers of her own clothing. "Are we safe?" the girl asked, voice trembling. "For now," Jane replied, "but we have to keep moving soon." She moved quietly around the cabin, surveying the space. A small hearth remained intact. She struck a match, coaxing a tiny flame to life. Soon, a small fire crackled weakly, casting flickering shadows across the walls. The children huddled close, shivering but slightly comforted. Outside, the storm raged, snow whipping through broken windows. Distant gunfire echoed across the forest. Jane's body ached, ribs bruised, muscles screaming, but she stayed vigilant. She watched the children, listened for threats, planned the next move. This night was far from over. German patrols still searched. The forest remained dangerous. But Jane Harris, survivor of her fallen unit, guardian of the innocent, would not falter. She would keep moving. She would keep fighting. And she would keep saving lives, no matter the cost. Her eyes scanned the forest through the cabin's broken window. Every shadow held danger. Every sound carried a warning. And yet, in the cold and dark, hope flickered. Not big, not certain, but enough to drive her forward. She whispered softly to the children, "We survive, we move, we keep going, together." And with that, Jane Harris prepared to step back into the night, relentless, determined, unbroken. Snow fell harder now, draping the forest in white silence. Jane Harris pressed forward, the children clinging to her sides, fragile but alive. Every sense was heightened. The forest was a maze of shadows and hidden dangers. German patrols could be anywhere, waiting for a misstep, a sound, a breath too loud. The cabin behind them offered warmth, but Jane knew it wasn't safe to linger. Supplies were scarce, shelter was temporary. She had to keep moving. Survival demanded motion, and she couldn't risk hesitation. Ahead, the terrain shifted into a ridge that sloped sharply down toward a frozen creek. Jane crouched behind a snow-covered boulder, peering at the path. The children huddled against her coat, trusting her entirely. Their faith was both a burden and a weapon. She couldn't fail them. "Stay close," she whispered, "one step at a time. Quiet now." The creek sparkled faintly in the moonlight, ice forming jagged patterns along the edges. Jane tested the footing carefully. The current was fast but narrow. If they crossed quickly and silently, the water would mask their tracks, hiding them from anyone following. She led the children carefully onto the frozen surface. Ice groaned and cracked under weight, and Jane froze several times, heart hammering. A faint shout carried across the wind, German voices, close. She pressed the children down, keeping them low against the ice. Bullets kicked up snow around them, sending shards like deadly glass. Jane gritted her teeth, her body burning with tension. Every movement counted. One slip, one sound, one miscalculation, and they'd be targets. Finally, they reached the far bank. Relief surged through her, but she pushed it down. Danger wasn't over. The forest ahead was dark, dense, and unpredictable. She guided the children into thick evergreens, branches scraping their faces and catching their coats. A faint lantern glow appeared through the trees, another farmhouse. Jane studied the distance, noting patrol patterns, listening for voices. Every shadow, every sound was a puzzle she had to solve with precision. "Almost there," she whispered. "Stay with me." Step by careful step, they moved, snow crunching softly underfoot, wind masking some of the sound. They reached the edge of the clearing. Jane ducked low, pushing the children ahead gently. The farmhouse was intact enough to provide real shelter this time. They slipped inside, closing the door behind them. Inside, the room was cold but dry. Jane pulled blankets from a crate, wrapping the children as she checked for frostbite or injuries. The boys' lips were blue, the girls' cheeks streaked with tears. Jane kissed their heads gently, whispering promises she hoped she could keep. Outside, the storm raged. Gunfire echoed faintly in the distance, but the children were safe for the moment. Jane knew that when dawn came, they would move again. But tonight, they had survived another leg of the journey, and for Jane Harris, that was everything. Dawn broke pale and cold, spilling weak light across a landscape buried in snow. Jane stirred the children, checking their warmth and guiding them to a small fireplace corner in the farmhouse. The storm had subsided, leaving a brittle silence that pressed down on the forest. Every shadow seemed alive, every noise amplified. She studied a map in her mind, recalling the forest's twists and paths. The goal was clear: get the children to safety, through the forest, past patrols, to a partisan group rumored to be nearby. Every second counted. Every step could be the difference between survival and death. Breakfast was nothing more than cold bread scavenged from the farmhouse remnants, but it provided sustenance. Jane kept an eye on the children, feeding them first, then herself. Their energy was fragile, yet their determination mirrored her own. They had come this far. She refused to let exhaustion end their journey. She peered outside. German patrols still scoured the forest edges, boots crunching over snow, rifles ready. Jane waited, timing their departure. Patience had become her sharpest weapon. "Ready?" she whispered. The boy nodded, the girl clung tightly. Jane took a deep breath, shoulders aching, and stepped into the snow. The forest was a maze of shadows, jagged branches, and ice-crusted trails. Jane led the children through narrow passages, ducking beneath low-hanging trees, moving silently over frozen streams and treacherous ground. Every sense was alert, scanning for the enemy. A distant rifle shot echoed. Jane froze, pressing the children flat. The bullet embedded itself in a tree trunk nearby, splinters scattering. German patrols were close, too close. She held her breath, counting slowly, timing the patrol's movements. Then, as if guided by instinct, she led them down a concealed ridge, hidden from view. Hours passed like this, silent, tense, methodical. The children's small hands were numb from cold, their bodies trembling, but Jane carried them as best she could. Each movement was calculated, every breath controlled, every shadow analyzed. Finally, a faint flicker appeared through the trees. A small cabin, smoke curling from the chimney. Jane's chest tightened. Shelter, warmth, safety. But she moved cautiously, scanning the surrounding area. Patrols could appear at any moment. She led the children through a narrow path, branches snapping softly underfoot, until they reached the cabin door. Inside, the warmth hit them instantly. Jane checked for injuries, rubbed frozen fingers, and let the children rest for a few minutes. The boy's lips were blue, the girl's eyes heavy with exhaustion. She whispered, "Almost there, just a little further." Outside, the forest stretched endlessly. Jane knew danger had not passed, but she also knew that for now she had bought the children a small reprieve, and she would use every ounce of strength to keep them alive. Night fell again, deeper and colder than before. Jane led the children out of the cabin, cloaked by darkness. Every shadow could conceal death. Every sound could betray them. But Jane Harris had survived worse than night and snow combined. She had survived bullets, explosions, fire, and loss. She had survived when everyone else had fallen. And she would survive tonight because she had to. The trail ahead was narrow, winding between cliffs and frozen streams. Jane moved carefully, guiding the children step by step. Their trust fueled her. Their fragility sharpened her senses. One slip could cost them everything, yet she pressed forward, unyielding. A faint glimmer appeared through the trees, a safe house, lights barely visible through the branches. Relief surged, but Jane pushed it down. Patrols could intercept them at any moment. She signaled the children to move slowly, crouched low, silent as shadows. The last stretch was the most dangerous. Open snowfields lay between them and safety. Jane calculated each step, timing movements with distant patrol patterns. The wind bit at her face, but she ignored it. The children clung to her, trembling but moving. Suddenly, a shot rang out. Jane dove, dragging the children down. The bullet hit the snow where the children had been standing moments before. Her heart pounded, adrenaline surging. She pressed them flat, whispering, "Stay down. Don't move. Trust me." The soldiers' voices faded. Jane exhaled silently. One more stretch, one final push. She led them through a narrow thicket, branches scratching their faces, snow slowing every step. Then the lights of the safe house glimmered brighter. A wooden gate opened, figures silhouetted in the doorway. Partisans, allied forces, safety. Tears welled in the children's eyes as they were pulled inside, warmth surrounding them, danger finally left behind. Jane followed, collapsing briefly against the wall, exhausted beyond words. Her body ached, but she was alive. They were alive. And for Jane Harris, that was victory enough. The children huddled close, eyes wide with awe and gratitude. Jane whispered softly, "You're safe now. No one can touch you here." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, the fire of hope burned brighter than ever. Jane Harris had survived impossible odds, saved lives that could have been lost forever, and proven that courage, determination, and unwavering resolve could defy even the most merciless night. She sat silently, watching the children sleep, the weight of the night finally pressing down. But her resolve remained unbroken. This night had tested her, pushed her to the limits of human endurance, but she had triumphed. And somewhere in the darkness, beyond the forest, Jane Harris knew that no matter what came next, she would rise again, always.